Hello, dear viewers. Today we have two stories. The first. A student's teacher bullied them, so their dad exposed the teacher's corrupt judge husband, leading to his removal from the bench as revenge. The second. A Redditor endured 13 years of abuse from their mother and stepfather. Through careful planning, they orchestrated their downfall, leading to their divorce and loss of child custody. Okay, let's start from first story. How my dad got revenge on a teacher who bullied me. When I was in 8th grade, I tried out for a spot on the drill team. For those unfamiliar with that, it's the group that dances alongside the marching band, and we were separate from the cheerleaders. Think the Rockettes, but awkward. The reason I tried out was because those girls, you know the ones, pretty, popular, teacher favorites, laughed at me when I showed up for the informational meeting. They said I wasn't right for it and didn't belong. It made me more determined to learn the routines and become a little more fit so I could do them. I was flexible as much as a 14-year-old could be, but at home I practiced and stretched and showed up for the rehearsals and tryouts. Only a couple of decent girls would not act like I was poison in the line when we had to link our arms. I passed tryouts because I could do the routine. My dad, who owned his own business doing car repair, wasn't rich, but he managed to pay for my camp fees and uniforms. He dropped me off each morning of summer camp on his way to work. There we learned the routines we would be performing at pep rallies and football games. We had to stand out in the sweltering Louisiana heat and humidity in August and stand in position for minutes at a time. Any move and you had to do kicks. This was a version of push-ups or having to run laps where you stood and did sets of 25 high kicks for each infraction. I ended up with blisters on my upper arms from the sun. Oh, let me tell you about the sponsor, the teacher in charge. She was the epitome of cranky old woman who had an only child who went through these dance teams and did private dance lessons. She was perfect to her mom. At the time, dance moms wasn't a thing, but that's exactly like how she was. She would berate me for the smallest things and basically bully me along with the other girls. For example, when I was feeling faint for having to do kicks for the 3rd time that day, I was sitting down beside another girl who had pulled a hamstring. She is sitting with us while watching her daughter, who was our choreographer, of course, commenting how wonderful she was, and said to me to get back out there. She could understand why the other girl was sitting. She was an athlete, so she got a pass. She played basketball as well. She would yell at me from across the gym to suck in my stomach. She told me I was rude when I was eating lunch with everyone else and laughing at something someone said and coughed on my sandwich. The other girls would say things to me also, and it was as though she encouraged it. Not only is junior high bad enough, but this on top of it was bad. I tried to be strong and show them I could do it, but it made me cry as soon as I got home. This time was different than it is now. Our student newspaper would put out a who's who based on physical traits like best hair and best smile. Way to shoot down vulnerable, self-conscious kids. The night of our first game performance, I was waiting to be picked up with a few others and the sponsor. She went to the bathroom and came back with one girl who was caught smoking in the bathroom with some high school kids. Her punishment was she had to sit out the next game. My dad was running late. He had to work and couldn't just leave his shop unattended. And after about 30 minutes, she told me, "You know this means you're off the team." My dad pulled up a few minutes later, and as soon as I got in his truck, I was sobbing. I told him what happened, and he said, "Just a minute, I'll be right back," and proceeded to rip that woman a new one about her attitude towards me. So, the revenge. Years later, this woman brings her car to my dad's shop for repair. He remembers her, but she doesn't remember him. She was just as condescending as she had ever been, treating him like a lowly servant under her because he did manual labor. He was writing her estimate for the insurance, and she kept trying to get him to add in stuff that wasn't caused by the accident she was there for. Things like a ding on the back bumper when the damage was in the front, etc. He wouldn't do it, and she got all huffy and said something like if he didn't, she would have his license revoked. Now, since my dad had his shop broken into and tools stolen, he had installed cameras. He sent that video to the insurance adjuster, one he had a long, good relationship with in his course of business, and she got hit with attempting insurance fraud charges. I don't know the exact extent of it, but she should be glad her threats to his livelihood weren't added on there. And now it's time for second revenge story. Let's go. 13 years of preparation for revenge. The main characters in this story. Me, obvious brother, Mark half-brother, Sam half-sister, Alicia. Mom. Mom names changed for security reasons. Disclaimer. For reasons so you don't have to read my entire life story, there will be time skips throughout the story. Some of it won't make sense, and there may be more questions after it's done. But I'm just condensing this down to bare bones, including the important events and the revenge. The long part is the backstory. Long backstory. My mom is the highest level of a failed parent. When I was 2, my baby brother Mark was born. As a typical 2-year-old, I didn't like that and proceeded to act out in regards to it. As time went on, though, I learned from my grandfather and grandmother that treating someone like that wasn't a good idea, and then turned my act around to love and care for him and help out where I could. However, this didn't change much. My mother basically threw me away to be raised by my grandparents because I was a demonic hellspawn of a child. In her mind, her new child was latest greatest, and I was just old news. Let's time skip. My mother has now had her 4 kids, Mark and I with my dad, and Sam and Alicia with my stepfather. I'm about 13, Mark 11, Alicia is about 1.5, and Sam was just born. Mom and Dad are divorced. Mom married stepdad, and I am at the rebellious age now where things don't make sense to me, and I feel like I know everything, so my stepdad's idea is to beat it out of me. Every time I showed any sense of individuality or questioning something, I got beat for it, sometimes right in front of my mother, and she didn't care a bit. This is where the trigger for me wanting my revenge started. But being 13 and sadly, a little on the mentally damaged side from all of the beatings, and having a bookcase full of books land on me at around 11, I had no concept of what sort of revenge would come from my mind at the time, so I decided that waiting would be best. Mom's mistake 1 has been made. On top of that, my mother and stepdad refused to do any housework. Instead, waiting for the weekend when Grandma and Grandpa would leave to visit Grandma's mother and put us to work cleaning the house and doing stuff adults should be doing. Now, I get the concept of chores. Chores are fine. It's when you make your child climb ladders and get on the roof at the age of 11 to clean out gutters or climb trees to snip branches and such that it gets a bit too dangerous. This happened since I was about 10. Yes, I know. Things are a little out of order. I'll keep on track. Time skip to when I'm 14. My mother told me and Mark to watch Alicia. She was 2 by this time. Stepdad wanted to play video games, and when we weren't being bad in his eyes, he'd let us watch. But we were never allowed to play without him there watching us. I pop up while I'm sitting there and ask, "Where is Alicia?" Full-blown panic mode, go. Mark and I just up and go scouring through the house. Stepdad goes to check my mom's room where she's sleeping with Sam, who she was up with all night. My dad was in the kitchen making himself something to eat while he was visiting, then freaked out and burned his hand on the stovetop when everyone started freaking out, then started searching. Mark and I ran out back and looked around, saw nothing, didn't even think to check the pool. So we ran back inside and rummaged through the garage. Next thing, we hear my mother screaming at the top of her lungs, and we rush outside to find Alicia on the deck not breathing, and my mother and stepdad trying to perform CPR on her. My father drags Mark and I away to go inside, and the ambulance is called. Needless to say, Alicia did not survive, and they pulled the plug on her that night. Mom's mistake, too, has been made. Mark and I were devastated. Being the teenager I was and the preteen he was, we immediately blamed ourselves, and our grandparents assured us that it wasn't our fault or responsibility, and that we need to know this isn't on us. A week later, Child Protective Services got word and came, and my father, in his infinite wisdom, initiate a custody battle with my mother after this, claiming she wasn't capable of caring for her children, and won temporarily. Needless to say, our grandparents believed we belongs with our mother and fought back. My mom ultimately won us back. Time skip. I'm 18 now. I'm an adult. I'm looking to graduate high school and make my mark on the world and get my life going. Mark was 15 now, had gotten into a fight and broke his finger. It had to be repaired with pins and screws and was on some pretty hefty pain medicine. I don't remember the name. It was my mother's job to watch him and regulate his pain medicine so nothing bad would happen. Sadly, that bad thing did happen. Grandfather picked me up from school one day, and I could see he had a gloomy look on his face. We showed up to the house, and as we were walking up, I could see the paramedics rolling a stretcher with a body bag on it. Mark had died from a drug overdose at the age of 15 because my mother wasn't watching him like she should have been. That was the final straw. At that moment, my family was divided, my dad's side and my mother's side. My mother had my grandparents, who I was living with at the time, and my father had me and his family. I sided with my father completely, his argument being that had she been a better mother, Mark would still be alive. And what's worse, Sam had been taken away by CPS, Child Protective Services, and put in foster care. My mother was never allowed to raise children again, and I never saw my half-brother ever again. I was now an only child. My mother had destroyed the life I knew with her neglect, so I was going to ruin the rest of her life any way I could. Revenge time. This woman caused the deaths of 2 of my siblings, and I never got to see my living half-sibling again. Abused me mentally, emotionally, physically, took away my childhood, and every time I look at her, I can't help but seethe with unmitigated rage. The first revenge. My grandfather had basically been my best friend. He took me in, cared for me, taught me all sorts of different skills. He had one flaw, though. He was too kind for his own good. Something my mother maliciously preyed on after the deaths in the family. My grandmother gave up hope and just diverted to his opinion on everything. So, I made it a point that every time she tried, I challenged her on it in front of them, made sure she had to fight for what she wanted. I always lost, but I could see my constant meddling would get to her, irritate her. I wanted her to do something. I wanted her to hit me, harm me, give me a single reason. She never went that far, but she did break down crying multiple times. Then I got lucky. She slipped at work, herniated a few of her discs, and messed her back up really badly. When I got the news, I grinned. Around this time, my stepdad had been imprisoned for doctor shopping, and my mother wanted a divorce from him. When she came home from the hospital, I would take her meds and hide them around the house and sometimes even throw them away. I wanted her to be in agony. I wanted her to suffer as much as possible, and she did. A few months later, she got into a car wreck, and the police found out she was on a hefty amount of her pain meds. She was charged with a DUI and put in jail for 6 months. I grinned and laughed once I got that news and proceeded to planning my next stage. She was in pain and behind bars. This was perfect. The second revenge. Time skip again. After she got out of jail, we'll skip ahead a few years. She's now living with us. I'm officially in college. I did the stupid thing and took a year off between high school graduation and applying to a college, so my grandparents made me a deal. As long as I worked and was in school, I could stay with them free of charge. Who wouldn't take that deal? While my mother was in jail, I made it a point to shove all of her property into a storage and made her room my room, and turned my old living space into my gaming room. She had no choice but to sleep on the couch. I enjoyed every moment of her agonizing when she would get up from laying on the couch, agonizing because the metal bars on it would press into her back as she slept. This was my revenge for some time, slow and painful. The third revenge, time skip. We moved back to the old house we were all living in, and my mother has made her back worse through a series of mistakes and bad decisions. She had somehow convinced my grandparents to start illegally procuring drugs for her. She would make the connection with the dealer, and they would shell out money to her for them. I argued with my grandparents to stop. It was illegal, and it will land them all in jail if they get caught. My grandfather agreed, but my grandmother couldn't help but take care of her little girl and guilted my grandfather into it. I refused to be a part of it. I put in an anonymous tip into local law enforcement, but sadly nothing came of it. My revenge had failed this time. But I didn't know I would get the ultimate screw you in, 'cause it came in the form of my most malicious, vindictive statement ever spoken. Plus, I was still messing with her hiding her medications. It's childish, but sometimes you have to be a bit childish to get the point across. The final revenge. I am 31 now. It has been 13 agonizing years since my brother Mark died, and I have finally completed my revenge on my mother. My grandfather just passed last year, and I have been saving a veritable buttload of cash from over the years in jobs I worked, inheritance form, other deaths in the family, and so on. I went to visit my grandmother, who's not been in great shape since my grandfather passed, and her dog passed about 6 months after that. My mother comes out to me while we're sitting there talking and asks if I will take care of her after Grandma was gone, that it was my duty as her son. She was broke, my grandmother was going into a retirement home, and my mother blew through her inheritance with her dealings. The rest was going to me. I knew it for a fact. I stood up, and while I stared my mother directly in the eyes, I managed the most hateful, vicious stare I could muster. It wasn't hard, and told her, "You get nothing from me. Grandma's going into a retirement home. I'm moving states. You destroyed my life, took away my childhood, were responsible for the deaths of my siblings, broke the law numerous times, and you made everyone's lives a living hell. You will be on the street and die alone, and I will laugh. I never loved you, and I never will. You will never see your grandchildren if, when there are any, you will not be at my wedding. You will never be mother to me again. Rot in hell." My grandmother's jaw hit the floor, and my mother burst into tears. I had finally broken her and got my revenge. It may not seem like much to you all, but that moment was heavenly for me. It felt amazing to finally know I've gotten my ultimate revenge after all of these years and damned her to suffering. My grandmother is going into that retirement home in about 3 months, and I'm helping her move her stuff, so there will be no chance of her little girl weaseling her way out of her fate. After that, I'm moving to a new state and starting my new life with a new job and wonderful girlfriend who I love more than anything. For those of you who have brothers and sisters, love them, cherish them, and be with them, 'cause you never know what's going to happen. This revenge was born of me losing my siblings, the one thing I loved most in this world. Being an older brother was the happiest time in my life, and after they died and Sam was taken by CPS, I have had to suffer as an only child and still cry myself to sleep at night over it. It was traumatizing, so please cherish your siblings. Thank you for reading. Edit. After sitting down and reading again, I have realized that I labeled Sam and Alicia wrong. They are my half-siblings, not my step-siblings. Same mom, different dad. Apologies. What you think about this 2 stories? Write in the comments below. If you want to see more videos like this, press like, subscribe, and allow notifications.